Ladies and gentlemen, hello, and welcome to the 10th event in the series of webinars hosted by Green Growth Knowledge Partnership, GGKP, under GEF 10785 Global NEP Update Project. And taking this opportunity, let me extend our deep gratitude for registering and joining this webinar. My name is Anastasia Buchok, and I'm working for GGKP and Global NEP Update Project. And today's webinar is dedicated to strengthening collaboration with national statistical offices to address gaps in POPs data. And in the course of development of the NEPs, countries face such challenges as lack of robust data and comprehensive inventories. Moreover, POPs data is frequently scattered and should be collected across various institutions, and this makes it difficult for POP inventory teams to access the necessary information. And to address this, the project developed a guidance document outlining some options for improving data hosting for POPs inventories by the national statistical offices, which we will be talking about in this webinar, and I will leave this to the speakers. As always, this webinar will be conducted in English language and would be recorded. Event is supported by 6 interpreters who would ensure interpretation into French, Spanish, Russian languages. So please feel free to select the language in the bottom of your screen. And the event would be technically facilitated by GGKP, my colleague Sumin and me. Once we start, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. It's really great opportunity to meet colleagues. Some colleagues join us a couple of times, and we're happy to see new join us today. Moreover, once we start, it would be great if you also come and join our group on Green Forum. So far, we have 200 members, but we do invite you to join if you haven't yet joined, and leave your questions about this webinar in this group or just about POPs and chemicals management in overall. Feel free to share your NEP experience with your colleagues in the group. And we really want to learn more from each other. And taking this opportunity, let me also remind that the next webinar will be on 21st of November. That's the day. That's on Thursday, and it would be dedicated to the quality assurance and quality control of POPs data. So we kindly encourage you to register and to share. We will share the link in the chat, and please feel free to share this link with your colleagues who work on NEPs and POPs. Now let me give the floor to Dr. Roland Weber, the expert on POPs and national implementation plans. Over to you, Roland. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anastasia. Good day, everybody. So the first presentation of today is on the guiding methodology for strengthening collaboration with national statistical offices to address gaps in POPs data and related information. You might know here this publication from UNEP named From NIPs to Implementation Lessons Learned report. So that was a summary of a large NIP project, overall information, and for more than 40 countries are compiled there. And one conclusion of this publication was that the experience with setting priorities for POP management in low and middle income countries and with reporting on the status of implementation of the Stockholm Convention is characterized by a frequent lack of robust data and inventories. For example, basic data like the amount of e-waste and related plastic, or data on end-of-life vehicles were and are frequently lacking, as experienced when developing inventories on PBDEs, where e-waste and end-of-life vehicles are key. Furthermore, data were often scattered at different institutions with challenges to access by POP inventory teams. The UNEP developed now a guidance, including a methodology to address gaps in POP data for developing inventories and manage POPs. So this is on the Green Growth Knowledge platform and the main content of this first presentation. So this guidance elaborate on the key role of national statistical offices, which should play as a kind of data hub for the development of inventories, and aim also to strengthening the collaboration with national statistical offices. It also informs on major data needed for POP inventories related to the sectoral POP inventories approach. This is another guidance which we introduced in July and which is online recorded. And these sectors are especially the electronics sector, the transport and the building sector. So this is an overview of inventory guidances, but also web guidances of the Stockholm Convention. And you probably know, or many of you know, that we have these different individual POP inventory guidances. Like I said, we have now also the sectoral POP inventory guidance, and another new guidance developed for this NIP update is the guidance on POP data, which is the content of this presentation. And we also developed a guidance on quality assurance and quality control. And as Anastasia said, there will be a webinar next Thursday, the same time, where you can register on this last guidance document. So looking to the structure of this guidance for POP data in strengthened national statistical offices, the structure of the guidance considers major POPs groups and the sectoral approach for POP inventories, major for the main industrial POP inventories in electronics, transport and buildings. So therefore, the chapters are structured after the introduction in providing data for the inventory of electronics and electronic waste and related POPs, chapter on providing data on inventories of the transport sector and related POPs, and one chapter about providing data for the inventory of POPs in buildings and construction. Then we have thought and added a short chapter on PCBs and data, one chapter on national information, especially related to contaminated sites, including POP pesticides. You know, most of them has already gone and are mainly stockpiles, waste and contaminated sites, but also contaminated sites on industrial POPs and unintentional POPs. So that's chapter 6. And chapter 7 then is on recommendation for improving the data framework for supporting POP inventories on the National Statistical Office level. So one thing I would like to highlight is that the inventories for electronics and electronic waste and vehicles are the base for a range of POPs to develop POP inventories. This means first, these basic inventories need to be developed on electronics, electronic waste, on vehicles, end-of-life vehicles, and then with this data, you can then develop POP inventories with the different impact factors which we have developed and which are in the sectoral inventory guidance. And what is very important is the synergies of POP inventories with other conventions. There are other chemicals of concern where inventories are needed for appropriate management. This includes, for example, the F gases, fluorinated gases like CFCs, HCFCs, HFCs. They are ozone depleting substances, they are greenhouse gases, or mercury, which is addressed in the framework of the Minamata Convention. The F gases are included partly in the Montreal Protocol for the CFCs, and for the others also in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So here, synergies between POPs inventories and inventories of these ozone depleting substances and greenhouse gases or mercury present in the same product and waste categories should be made. Yeah, because we have many F gases, for example, in building insulation foams, we have F gases in vehicles, and we have them in electronics and electronic waste. And the three product and waste sector, mean electronics, transport, and buildings, contain also resources like metals, including critical metals, precious metals, but also plastic. And so they are very important for the circular economy, which also could be included in the database. Actually, in my opinion, this could be the biggest driver to have robust inventories on electronics, transport, and buildings, when countries also look to the resources. Yeah, and while then doing a detailed inventory of these sectors, at the same time you can feed in plastics and also POPs. There is the UN Framework Classification for Resources, UNFC, which started an initiative on anthropogenic resources. This means the resources which we have currently in the Anthropocene, in products. Yeah. And I think it would be great that in countries, but maybe also on UN level, these activities on databases could be linked. And also, information on POP inventories are relevant for certain sustainable development goals, SDGs, reporting with indicators related to chemicals and waste. So this include, for example, indicator 12.4.1, information transmitted under chemicals and waste conventions. So directly here, the POP data are relevant also for SDG reporting. And also indicator 12.4.2, hazardous waste generated and treated, of course, should also include major POP wastes. And there is indicator 12.5.1 is about recycling rate. And as you will see here, for these sectors, what I said, we have huge amount of metals, we have huge amount of plastics. So therefore here also the inventories are relevant for recycling, for calculating recycling rate, and for reporting recycling rates to the SDGs. So therefore, we recommend an integrated approach with inventory and management of plastic containing POPs. Most of the listed industrial POPs here are plastic additives like flame retardants, the PBDEs, the hexabromocyclododecan, hexabromobiphenyl, Decloran plus. Also PCBs has been partly used as plastic additive. We have plasticizer POPs like the short chain chlorinated paraffins and the medium chain chlorinated paraffins, which will become listed in May 2025. We have the first UV stabilizer, UV328, and also PFAS in side chain fluoropolymers are related to plastics. Yeah, so therefore, when moving to a more circular economy for plastic management within a global plastic treaty, plastic will be increasingly recycled. The separation and environmentally sound management of plastics containing POPs provide here the opportunity for recycling of non-impacted plastic fraction and energy recovery of POP containing plastic fraction. But this requires good data and inventories. Yeah. So therefore, in our sectoral guidance in inventory making, we always highlight that at the same time you make the POP inventory, you also have for these categories the plastic inventory. Just showing how relevant these plastic categories are, the three sectors, this mean electronics, transport, and building, make a relevant share of the overall use of plastic worldwide. This include about 30% or more than 30% of all plastic production is used in these three sectors. Considering the long service life in these three sectors, likely today more than 50% of all plastic stocks are contained in these sectors today and are highly relevant for plastic management and recycling. And there's also a fourth sector. This is the textile sector, which today largely contain plastics. This means especially polyester. So more than 60% of all textiles today are made from polyester. And also they contain partly POPs and other chemicals of concern as additives, which can be added and considered in the management. So yes, only a part of these plastics contain POPs, and many of these POPs have been phased out and are no longer used, but are still present in articles and products in use or in end of life. I have chosen here as a figure this cathode ray tube. Yeah, they are more or less not produced anymore, but still a large part of the e-waste in low and middle income countries come from CRTs. Also here, for example, the fax machine today, yeah, that's gone, but still it is in stocks and in waste and it's flame retarded. Therefore, it is a useful approach to develop in these three major use sectors an overall plastic inventory, which contain information on impacted and non-impacted plastics. The management of waste from buildings, electronics and transport sector should not only address POPs and plastic, but also these ozone depleting substances, greenhouse gases, but also lead, cadmium and mercury. Yeah, so this is highlighted in the sectoral guidance, which is also on GGKP website, and the webinar is also online there. An overall inventory of plastics and these substances seems an opportunity for synergies and the global improvement of management of plastics, POPs, and other chemicals of concern. For promoting resource recovery from waste, a national database on major inventory sectors at National Statistical Office could therefore include POPs, other chemicals of concern, including plastics and resources like the metals. Such a database could form a basis for promoting a clean circular economy by improving the recovery of plastics and metals and the management of POPs and other chemicals of concern. National Statistical Office, now I at least have mentioned it 5 times. Yeah, it is defined as the leading statistical agency that has a coordination role within the national statistical system and is responsible for the development, production, and dissemination of official statistic across multiple statistical domains. Yeah, that's the definition from the UN DESA from 2019. The preferred case would be that major data needed for POP inventories would be available at the National Statistical Office, but countries might also have other names for it, but many are using the name National Statistical Office. Ideally, data relevant to multilateral environmental agreement, so-called MIAs, such as data for inventories, would best be available at such an agency. This would include data relevant for POP inventories, inventories for greenhouse gases, for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, for ozone depleting substances, for Minamata, and inventories for the upcoming UN Plastic Treaty. Such a central entity might best coordinate data and synergies of data and would make life of the inventory teams much easier. There are also data that are better hosted by other institutions, so it's not useful to have all the data, especially in the National Statistical Office level. Especially institutions which directly work with certain POPs containing products and equipment. One of this is the PCBs. So here, the database for transformers and capacitors, this is best hosted by the utility sector, and which are best positioned to take care of the updates. Yeah, if this would be hosted by the National Statistical Office, then maybe every day or every week, this would need to be updated on National Statistical Office level. So here the utility sector know much better on the nitty-gritty of this database and can update it. So this guidance here on the methodology for strengthening of this collaboration includes information and strategies for strengthening the collaboration with national statistical offices and other responsible institutions to address the identified gaps related to POP data or relevant information supporting POP data estimates. It includes recommendations on strengthening the dialogue with National Statistical Office and other responsible institutions for the production of national statistics relevant to POPs data, for national implementation plan review and update, but also, as you have seen, for other MIAs. The document provides guidance here on national and international data sources, gathering information to develop for POP inventories. It emphasizes strengthening cooperation with National Statistical Office and other governmental institutions who might possess relevant data for these POP inventories. This includes administrative data sources, for example, vehicle registration, or statistical data sources like surveys developed by some other institution. Furthermore, there are some international reports and approaches which compile international data with country-specific information which can be used to develop POP inventories. For example, the United Nations University and United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, are publishing reports on global and regional data on electrical and electronic waste and publishing it online, country specific. We will come to that. So here, now coming to the three sectors and the first three chapters. The three sectors, electronics, transport, and construction, contain the major share of industrial POPs and other chemicals of concern, but also large resources. Therefore, it is useful to have an overall inventory for POP additives, other chemicals of concern, plastics, and for resources as basis for developing management strategies for these three large waste and resource sectors. So inventory and management of POPs in major affected plastic can improve the management of plastics in these sectors and result in the depollution of these sectors. So when we look back the last 10 years, we already have good experience with global phase out of production of major brominated flame retardants, hexabromocyclododecan and decabromodiphenyl ether, which are not produced anymore, but still present in the legacy products. And also Decloran Plus has been now, the production has phased out. So the Stockholm Convention parties started already to do inventory and management of POPs in these three major sectors since 2011. So now when we have additionally Decloran Plus, UV328, short chain, medium chain chlorinated paraffins, this strong link is still further extended. So therefore POP inventory and management can become an excellent synergy with the upcoming plastic treaty. The POP management in these sectors require the inventory and management of all these plastics. So both data are needed in these inventories. And this gives you an overview on the major polymers. Yeah, here on the y-axis, you have the polymers, the major polymers, and here you have the major use sectors. And we are looking especially to buildings construction, automotive and electric and electronics. And only a share of these plastics contain POPs. Yeah, the largest share does not contain POP. Yeah, so what you see here, I have tried with the red circles to highlight, let's say, some POP use areas for different applications. And therefore, we have, for example, some polymers here in construction, for example, the EPS, XPS, where a large share contain POPs, in this case, hexabromocyclododecan. Yeah, but for others, for example, here when we go to polypropylene in the automotive sector, more than 90% of the plastic, for sure, even more than 90%, does not contain POPs. Yeah. So these kind of information are needed for POP inventories, but they are heavily needed when we now start to recycle more the plastics. So for recycling, the polymer distribution of major use sectors is needed. So this is here compiled for Europe. The POP and other chemicals of concern use frequency is often unknown. Yeah. So therefore, I have only put it in some of the different plastics and uses where, let's say, we have some information. For many, we do not have really robust information, and can be as high or low. Yeah. So therefore, also now and in future, more monitoring is needed, and is also currently done and need to be compiled on the UN level. For new listed industrial POPs still produced, the inventory need to assess the whole life cycle. This means it's important exercise to understand data gaps and need for improvement, starting from import, the use, the trade, the end of life, and today more and more important with the circular economy, recycling, where these pollutants and the plastics can come back into new products. For industrial POPs, the recycling need to be considered even and more in future. And also here we have developed with the Stockholm Convention but web guidances, the first robust guidances on the separation of these plastics, and also currently the Basel Convention has developed the first draft on plastic and plastic recovery from waste, which contain useful information to address these tasks in the next years to come. Coming now to the electronics. E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream, and the POPs are in the plastic fractions. Today, we have around 62 million tons of e-waste per year globally. In 2030, it's estimated that 74 million tons are coming. So e-waste contains resources like valuable ferrous and non-ferrous metals, including aluminium, copper, iron, gold, silver, platinum, and also recyclable plastics, especially polypropylene, high-impact polystyrene, and ABS plastic, which are very valuable when you separate it. But also it contains the POP in these fractions and POP candidates and other chemicals of concern, which cause pollution if not managed here in an environmentally sound manner. For the inventory, it is possible to estimate from the e-waste amount also the plastic amount, because in average about 20% of the volume of electronics is plastics. So we can therefore estimate for 2022 that we have around 12 million tons of plastic which need to be managed globally. And for your countries, you see, you can calculate from your e-waste volumes, then also the e-waste plastic volumes you need to manage, separate, recycle, and treat those which contain the POPs. However, when we look into nitty-gritty of the e-waste generated today, only 17% is documented to have been collected and recycled, and the fate of the remaining 83% is unknown. So this is data from the global e-waste monitor. So this indicates that also less than 20% of the POPs in electronics and electronic waste plastics are formally collected and managed. For the inventory and sound management of major industrial POPs, much better inventory and environmental sound manner of management of electronic waste is the key basis. So therefore, robust national statistics on electronics and electronic waste need to be developed for the management of POPs and the management of related resources, including the plastics. But you need to consider that the main driver for e-waste management, and it could also be then for the inventory of e-waste, are metals, because they are the valuables. Today, in 2022, the overall global value of metals contained in every year's e-waste is estimated to $91 billion. Most of this potential value in e-waste is in copper, gold, and iron. These metals can be efficiently reclaimed today with high recycling rates using current e-waste management technologies. However, today, with the low collection and recycling rate of current e-waste management practices, results in only around 28 billion worth of metals being turned into secondary raw materials. This means more than 2/3 of all the metals today are lost. And I think if we would really do robust inventories for electronics and electronic waste and the related metals, this could facilitate awareness of policymakers, awareness of waste management, awareness of researcher, and improve the recycling and recovery. And together with this, when we then also look to the plastics and we know the POPs, overall, this could be managed, I think, in environmentally sound manner, much better than we have today. Which knowledge we have about POPs in plastic, we have compiled in inventory guidance documents. So here you have the overview on the impact factor of major electronics, where the POPs are. So we know that the major are in the CRT CRT casings of televisions and computers. Also, they are high in flat screens of TVs, but also other electronics which can get hot. Yeah, but we also know that, for example, cooling and freezing appliances are quite low in flame retardants. Yeah, not needed there. So therefore, if we have a robust e-waste data with robust plastic data, we have the impact factor, and by this, then the POP content can be calculated. Also, we have given in the sectoral guidance an overview on other POPs which are present in electronics, and also we have developed impact factor for relevant other POPs, including short chain paraffins, medium chain chlorinated paraffins, hexabromocyclododecan, and Decloran Plus in this guidance, that you can make an estimate after you have robust e-waste and plastic data. There are a range of other chemicals of concern in electronics and electronic waste related to multilateral environmental agreements, which can be addressed in a synergistic way for common inventories and implementation. This includes especially the F gases in refrigerators, freezers, and air conditioners, which are partly ozone-depleting substances and greenhouse gases. But also we have a range of heavy metals. Yeah. So when to do a metal inventory, not only the precious metals are relevant, but also the toxic heavy metals, yeah, including lead, cadmium, yeah, mercury, antimony, yeah, antimony especially present in plastics, yeah, and also I put here in the list plastics, yeah, as a hazardous component if it's not appropriately treated, because it results in huge contamination in low and middle income countries when this kind of waste is openly burned. Data on electronics and electronic waste import, current use stocks, and end of life should be available on national level, best at the National Statistical Office or another appropriate institution, which are able to provide and update information needed for POP inventories, here also for the Stockholm Convention implementation. Also, here data on the F gases for the development of inventories from UN Climate Change Convention, for ODS inventories, for Montreal, for mercury inventories of Minamata, and also for the Basel Convention reporting should be available. The United Nations University published a guidance on classification, reporting, and indicators for e-waste statistics, which may be used to develop a database on electronics and electronic waste categories, and data of this should contain information on categories with relevance to POPs, greenhouse gases, ozone-depleting substances, or mercury. One good help here is the UN Comtrade database. Import and export statistics for products are registered under the Harmonized Commodity Description and Coding System, short HS codes, developed by the World Customs Organization. Virtually all countries in the world, I think 200 plus, compile data, national data using the HS classification. The data are compiled by the United Nations Statistical Division, UNSD, and published in the UN Comtrade database. There are about 270 HS codes relevant to electronics and electrical and electronic equipment, and a list of HS codes related to the United Nations University keys is provided here in this guidance. Yeah, and our inventory development and the link between electronics and POPs we have included in the PBDE inventory guidance 2021 already the UNU keys to have a harmonized international approach. For countries without large production of electronics, the long-term import data from the HS codes can be used for an estimate of electronic waste in the country when considering the average service life and equipment. For countries with large production of electronics, the total production and the share of domestically sold and exported electronics and imported electronics need to be considered to develop the statistical data of the amount of electronics on the domestic market. And the second presentation in our webinar, we will show one case study where we recently compiled for Nigeria the HS codes over 30 years to understand how much electronics have been imported into the country, including the amount of plastics and including the amount of POPs. This will be the second presentation done by Professor Babayemi. So a robust electronics and e-waste database available at the National Statistical Office is therefore recommended, which contain the information fed into the UN Comtrade database and data established for electronic waste and related management. The import and production data can be aggregated by the National Statistical Office for an overview on electronics which enter the market. Survey on electronics in use and stocks can provide then data on major E categories relevant for POPs or greenhouse gases, ODS inventories, and improve the quality of the data. Based on the electronic import and use data and the service life of individual electronics, an estimate of e-waste can be developed, just by a material and substance flow analysis. And we have put case studies in the sectoral POP inventory guidance, which include material and safety, material substance flow analysis for electronic sector, one for the transport sector, and one for the construction sector. Such material flow analysis calculation can then be compared with V data in the countries and which are reported in the countries. And by this, you can understand how much of electronics is really covered by your e-waste management and how much is not covered. We in Germany, we are doing the same. And recently we have compared our data of the official statistics. I mean, how much is formally managed and how much by material flow analysis we would expect actually in the waste flow. And we have found that around 50% or even less is formally managed. And I think this needs to be done by all countries as a first step to understand where they stand with the e-waste management. And this is important. This national statistics on electronic waste is important to support the plastic and resource inventory here. It is estimated that 4% of global plastic production is used in electronics due to the long service life of electronics. For example, much longer than plastic packaging. The electronic sector accounts for up to 8% of the plastic present in the country and is therefore relevant for a national plastic inventory and for plastic management. Also, the plastic in electronics is more valuable. The price, for example, for ABS, compared to polyethylene or polypropylene. The data of major electronic waste categories or the material flow analysis estimates can also be used to estimate the total amount of plastics in electronics. An initial estimate of total plastic in electronics and electronic waste in the country can be based on total amount of electronics and what I said before, 20% of the plastic. And by this you understand, okay, how much of e-waste plastic in total you have. And then you need to look to the specific share of those which are impacted by the PBDs. You have seen before the table. It's especially, for example, televisions, computer and other equipment which gets hot. The detailed statistics on electronics and electronic waste can also be used for inventory and better management of recovery of resources. Here, especially for the precious metals, gold, palladium, platinum, or critical metals, including antimony, beryllium, cobalt, germanium, and indium. And this is heavily needed because we need to move to a more circular economy. So you have help. So that was about national statistic. And now 2 slides on international statistic on electronics and electronic waste and what kind of data are available. So here the Global E-Waste Statistical Partnership, so-called GESP, has the objective to improve and collect worldwide e-waste statistic in an internationally standardized way. It is a partnership managed by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, UNITAR, United Nations University, and the International Solid Waste Association. And since January 2022, it has been a program under UNITAR. So they assist countries in compiling e-waste statistics that are useful for national policy making with an international recognized harmonized measurement framework. So here the organization is publishing global, regional, and country e-waste reports. So the most recent one for global is the Global E-Waste Monitor 2024, but you have also regional e-waste monitors, like here the one for East and Southeast Asia, but there is also one on Africa, and there are now the first national e-waste monitors. I give here the example of Lebanon. So the information available here from this organization for each country is the amount and type of e-waste generated for the individual years 2018 to 2022, and also the amount of new electronics brought to the market in these years. Yeah. So I have put here the web link, yeah, of that website, and I have given here 2 examples, 2 country examples. One is Vietnam, yeah, where you see it is estimated that in Vietnam about 516 kilotons of e-waste is generated per year. The official e-waste collection rate in 2022 was 0. And electronics put on the market was 1,270,000 tons, yeah, overall. And you see here the double amount is put on the market than it's coming from the e-waste, because Vietnam is a strongly developing country with increased population, which have also money for electronics. And therefore, in future, also this e-waste generated will increase. I have chosen here a second country, Germany, about the same amount of people, a little bit less, but e-waste generated in Germany is more than 1.7 million tons. And the amount of electronics put in the market is also 1.7 million tons. Yeah. So here in Germany, we are already kind of in an equilibrium of new electronics and electronic waste. And here, yes, the e-waste collection rate is estimated to about 54%. These data can be used and compared with own statistics and can be used for calculation of e-waste plastics. Yeah, so it's very easy. So you just go on that website, check how much e-waste is generated in your country, multiply by 20%, and then you know how much e-waste plastic you have every year. Yeah. And also be used for estimate of POPs in these electronic waste when additionally information on the share of major V types is available in the country. Yeah. So therefore, you see for electronic waste, there's already good international activities which also provide countries which reasonable data. And I think here countries really can develop good inventories and then step by step develop good and better management, including POP inventories. Coming to the transport sector, today we have about 1.5 billion vehicles which are present globally, including 1.1 billion passenger cars. The 1.1 billion passenger cars contain about 200 million tons of plastic. Yeah? With an average lifetime of around 20 years, every year about 10 million tons of plastic waste are generated from passenger cars alone, which need to be managed in an environmental sound manner. When we look back the last 20 years, e-waste was always very big on the agenda, yeah, and in news and many reports. And you see this before, there's a global statistics. This is much less with passenger cars. Yeah. But when you, for example, look to the plastics, the amount of plastics now coming in end-of-life vehicles is the same like the plastics coming from e-waste. And when you look 10 years ahead, the plastic amount from end-of-life vehicles will be larger than the plastics from e-waste. Yeah. So therefore, also here, it's a very important sector, not only for management of the iron, yeah, but also for plastic. So within the management of end-of-life vehicles, the plastics, POPs, and other chemicals of concern need to be managed. The valuable metals, especially ferrous and non-ferrous metals, including some precious metals, are today recovered to a large extent by formal and informal recycling. The plastics and synthetic textiles in end-of-life vehicles are often not recycled or recovered, but are frequently disposed to landfills, dump sites, or openly burned, in particular in low and middle income countries. Considering also here to move to a more circular economy and to a better recovery of resources, including plastic parts from end-of-life vehicles need to be better reused and recycled. Yeah, and actually there is repurposing, there is reusing of these parts, also including in developing countries. But the largest share still, like I said, is just going to landfills and dump sites. This is required, for example, today in the update of the European End-of-Life Vehicle Directive. So this new proposal from 2023 suggests to require 25% recycled plastic content in new cars. Yeah, and I am involved also in that process somehow. At the moment in Europe, the car producers are really thinking, okay, how can we get reasonable plastic for our recycled content, which will be requested by the EU regulation. Yeah, and this can become a real change maker. Yeah, also globally. This 25% is not only from the recycling of plastic from vehicles, but there is also 6.25% required from recycling of plastic from end-of-life vehicle. Yeah, so I see that also in the coming years, this area of plastic from end-of-life vehicle is moving. But also in plastic from vehicles, when we think about inventory of POPs and other chemicals of concern in the transport sector, they are contained here, partly in plastic. Decabromodiphenyl ether was a main flame retardant used in vehicles. And before 2005, also a proportion of commercial penta-BDE has been used in the transport sector, especially in the United States, North America, for the treatment of the flexible polyurethane foam and backcoating of textiles. I emphasize it here because this commercial penta-BDE has a quite relevant toxicity, higher toxicity than the deca-BDE, and therefore these old vehicles are still a high risk of people which are using it. And most of these vehicles are not driving anymore in the United States, but rather than in Haiti or other Caribbean countries. Also, we have UV328 listed in 2023, which is still used in vehicles. Also other POP flame retardants, hexabromocyclorhodocane, HPB, and Decloran Plus, were also used in vehicles, but at lower levels. Also, we have developed impact factor for POPs for vehicles in the sectoral guidance, while for other categories like trains, airplanes, cruise ships, which are of course heavily flame retarded, at the moment there is no sufficient data, and I don't know any study which really is about also the end-of-life management and release and recycling of these materials. In the sectoral guidance, also we have included an overview on POPs in vehicles, and inventory. An overview of POPs and plastic in transport sector would therefore estimate the total amount of plastics and other polymers, including synthetic textiles in vehicles, and the amount generated in end-of-life vehicle management. consider the respective concentration of the individual POPs in vehicles, to estimate the total amount of POPs and possibly other chemicals of concern in plastic as one basis for the environmental sound management. And also in the inventory, the team should get information on the share of end-of-life vehicle polymers which are recycled and the products manufactured, and also get information on the share of end-of-life vehicle polymers which are not recycled, and the current waste management and the treatment. And also for end-of-life vehicles, we have developed impact factors. Yeah, so here, especially for the PBDEs with the highest amount, we have a calculation, a simple calculation, but I think it is relatively robust, the outcome and the estimate. So vehicles which are older than 2005 contain in average around 80 gram DKBDE. For the United States, it's not the DKBDE is lower, estimated 40 gram DKBDE, 40 gram commercial penta BDE, and then for vehicles younger than from 2005 up till 2017, we consider that they contain in average around 20 gram DKBDE, and after 2017, the DKBDE use in vehicles have more or less stopped. Therefore, for those vehicles, it would be 0. By this, it's easy to calculate from the age of the vehicles, from the amount of the vehicles, then the plastic amount, but also here the PBDE amount. Also for hexabromocyclododecan, we have developed impact factors. Here, these are the cars produced from the 1980s to 2013, in average around 3 gram hexabromocyclododecan. And also for other major POPs in vehicles, we have developed impact factors based on measurements here in Europe. Yeah, that's short chain chlorinated paraffins, 2.4 gram per vehicle. Medium chain chlorinated paraffin, you see 50 gram per vehicle. Yeah, it's also a big POP produced. This is mainly in cables and in PVC. And then also low amount of dechlorine plus, also around 3 gram per vehicle. And also we have initial measurements for PFOA and PFOS in vehicles. So here, based on the data also from Europe of end-of-life vehicles, we have an impact factor of 16 milligram of PFOA per vehicle and 15 milligram of PFOS in vehicle. Yeah. So based on this and the data from the transport sector, the data on plastics, yeah, you can make an estimate of POPs when you have this data in your databases. Yeah. Also, we have another range of chemicals of concern in the transport, especially also here the F gases, but also mercury in vehicles, especially when they have been produced for 2004. So here mercury have been used in anti-lock braking systems, high intensity discharge and active ride control system. And I was really astonished when I developed that guidance. That amount is quite high, yeah, but it's only for vehicles older than 2004. Yeah. Also for the F gases, yeah, it depends on the age of the vehicle, what kind of gas is used as a refrigerant or for air conditioning in vehicles. And you see that for all these POPs and chemicals of concern, you just not only need the amount of vehicles, but also you need the age of the vehicles. Yeah. And I think when you look and see that this is for several inventories needed, yeah, then it's also reasonable to develop that for the POPs, yeah, and do here the inventory then for the transport sector in a robust way, because all these other chemicals of concern, be it lead, be it mercury, be it F gases, they are high, yeah, if you don't really manage it. Robust data on car vehicle imports, current use stocks, and end-of-life vehicles should be available on the national level at National Statistical Office or another appropriate institution, which are able to provide and update information needed for POP inventories but also needed for greenhouse gas inventories, ozone depleting substance inventories, for mercury inventories, and the Basel Convention reporting. Yeah. So also here, with a robust inventory, you can feed in these major multilateral environmental agreement. For the development of the inventory of POPs and other chemicals of concern, the following information need to be gathered and best available at the National Statistical Office level: registered vehicles, cars, buses, trucks in use. Most countries have that, registered vehicles, but it can also be improved in some countries. Time resolved age of registered vehicles in the different POPs and other chemicals of concern like mercury, greenhouse gases, or ODS were produced and used in certain time periods. Share of vehicles produced in the different region, because some of the information is region specific. Yeah, like for example, this commercial penta BDE has more or less only be used in United States and North America. And the quantity of end-of-life vehicles for the inventory year. Yeah, and when we have this kind of information, then we can develop not only the inventory for vehicles, end-of-life vehicles, but also for the polymers in these vehicles and also for the POPs. And if we have the amount of vehicles in use, we can also do a material substance flow analysis, like I said, for the electronics. Yeah, and this is here the dynamic material substance flow analysis for Nigeria, where we had good data from registration, and we have had also a halfway robust estimate of the age of the vehicles. And then by the dynamic material substance flow analysis and the calculation of the POP in the vehicle, we could model how the development of decabromodiphenyl ether is depending on the years in end of life. Yeah. And from our estimate, you see that it will be 2029, 2030 that we expect the peak of deca BDE in end of life vehicle, because the service life of cars in Nigeria is quite long. Yeah. But you see that this kind of information is really relevant, and also for end-of-life vehicle management, recycling, and so on. Yeah, and can be really of practical use. So also from vehicles, it can support total plastic inventory. It is estimated that around 7% of global plastic production is used in vehicles. Also, due to the long service life of vehicles, the transport sector accounts for about 15% of the plastic present in countries, and is therefore relevant for the national plastic inventory and plastic management. An initial estimate of polymers in vehicles in a country can be based on the average polymer amount, which is approximately 200 kilogram per car. Yeah, and then just by calculation, how much is currently registered and how much go end of life, you can estimate how much plastic you have to manage. Detailed statistical data on the transport sector can be used for inventory and better management and recovery also of valuable resources, including precious metals. You have, for example, palladium and platinum in the catalyst in cars, which are quite expensive. Yeah, of course, iron, alumina, increasing, copper, and critical metals. Yeah, so therefore also here the end-of-life vehicle is very important for circular economy. Unfortunately, when we look to the international statistics, there is currently no detailed UN statistics developed for vehicles, end-of-life vehicles, similar to electronics and electronic waste. There is a Wikipedia website on which I sometimes check when I want to see how much vehicles is operated in a country, because this Wikipedia website is compiling the vehicle per 1,000 inhabitants. And they are using in this website international data sources. So for each of the individual estimates, there is also the resources. This means which publication, and often it is country reports, yeah, or regional reports. So here, therefore, you can use this page for an estimate if such information is not available. Also, the total number of vehicles per country is compiled on a WHO website, and the National Statistical Office and other national institutions can compare their national data with the data from this international statistics on vehicles and see which one is better. Yeah, I hope that the national statistic is better, but maybe sometimes there are good research work, and this research work sometimes might not go to the national statisticians, but might be available in the internet. Coming to chapter 4, building and construction. The building and construction sector is one of the most resource intensive, but also chemical intensive sector, downstream the chemical industry. Some of the chemicals in plastic and other materials in building and construction are POPs, including hexabromocyclododecan, PBDEs, the chlorinated paraffins, PCBs, and PFOA, but also other chemicals of concern. There is a good UNEP report, SciChem report about chemicals of concern in construction, which I can recommend. And the construction and demolition waste is the largest waste stream, accounting for more than 30% of all waste in the world. In total, around 10 billion tons of construction and demolition waste is generated and is increasing worldwide, with a large share of waste currently disposed to landfills. Also considering the large waste volume, which need to be managed in future, industrial countries are moving to a more circular economy, also for construction and demolition waste, with controlled deconstruction to better recover individual waste fractions and managing pollutants. Yeah, this is elaborated a bit in our sectoral guidance. So plastic materials from buildings need to be managed also in an environmental sound manner, possibly separation of plastics containing POPs and recycling of plastics fractions free of POPs and other chemicals of concern. And Germany had the first project here on an initial assessment of recycling potential of plastic from construction and demolition waste. And probably I think that all countries in the world are needing such a kind of assessment and start the plastic management also in the construction and demolition waste sector. Also, we have an overview here on POPs in this plastic in construction. Large amount of PBDEs, of hexabromocyclododecan, and of chlorinated paraffins. Some countries have relevant PCB amount in construction and demolition waste. So especially from sealants and paints, Germany, Switzerland, large problem in end of life of buildings and construction. In low and middle income countries, the PCB is normally of much lower relevance, but also useful to have to consider it, at least to have an assessment. Data on insulation foams in current use and end of life should be available at the National Statistical Office. This is a recommendation, or another appropriate institution, which should be available to provide the information needed for POP inventories, for the Stockholm Convention, for Basel Convention reporting, for greenhouse gas inventories, for the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention, and ODS inventory for the Montreal Protocol. Robust data on insulation foams are relevant for F-gases, especially the XPS and polyurethane foam, and related input for greenhouse gas inventory and ODS inventory for the Montreal Protocol. Also, polyurethane foam contain mercury, the older polyurethane foam, because mercury has been used as a catalyst for production of polyurethane foam, and therefore also should be included in the mercury inventory or the Basel Convention reporting. So the guidance here on strengthening National Statistical Office informs that following information should be available, like I said, for EPS and XPS insulation and the related hexabromocyclododecan, the polyurethane foam and related POPs, the PVC and related use and the chlorinated paraffins, cables and related POP in construction, and for some countries also sealants and adhesives related to POPs. In addition, information on treated wood with POPs and other chemicals of concern and of asbestos, which is very relevant for inventory of the construction sector, is a chemical of high concern, should be available. So national statistics for plastics, also here, the construction sector is very important. It is estimated that 19% of global plastic production is used in construction. Due to the long service life, the construction sector accounts normally for more than 30% of plastic present in a country and is therefore relevant for a national plastic inventory and for the management in future. For planning of national waste management, it is recommended to include polymer stocks in buildings and construction in a database at the National Statistical Office or Ministry of Construction level, including information on POPs, greenhouse gases, and ozone-depleting substances. This is one basis for planning the waste management and evaluating opportunities for recycling of polymers, of POP-containing polymers in construction and demolition waste. Detailed statistical data on buildings and construction sector can be used for inventory and better management of recovery also of valuable resources, because also this sector is important for metals, urban mining, for example, for iron, copper and alumina towards a circular economy. Currently, there is no UN international statistic developed for buildings and construction and demolition waste. There is a UNEP international agency report, global status report on buildings and construction, but this focuses only on energy efficiency. With the UN Comtrade data, there are some data which are relevant for polymers in construction. For example, there are some HS codes which are relevant, like the HS code for brominated polystyrene. So most of this is, let's say, used in construction insulation. So let's say some data for the construction sector we can get out of the UN Comtrade database, and we have developed publications. One of the publication HS codes for global for a complete inventory of plastics from Africa from all 54 countries. So this we have published in 2019. Professor Babayemi, here is the DOI where you can download it. It has open access. And we have published another study where we evaluated for Nigeria the import of PVC and polyurethane foam and rubber in respect to chlorinated paraffins to Nigeria in the past 20 years. And most of the polyurethane spray foam and about 2/3 of the PVC is going to construction. So by this, at least partly the inventory can be derived from international data of your imports. Important for the inventory in construction is hexabromocyclododecane, which has been a major additive flame retardant used in construction in EPS and XPS. From 1960s to 2021, some countries have already stopped 2015. So here about 0.7 million tons of hexabromocyclododecane were produced. 90% were used in EPS, XPS to average 1.5%, resulting in 42 million tons of EPS, XPS insulation containing HBCD. So this is still largely present in buildings, and it's one of the largest POP stockpile. So therefore quite relevant for countries which are using insulation. So EPS, XPS insulation are used in a variety of applications depending on the flammability standards in countries. And this figure is here for the European Union, because here different countries have different flammability standards. And depending on the flammability standards, EPS and XPS is completely flame retarded or only flame retarded partly, or here for the Nordic countries, they were mainly not using HBCD in their EPS and XPS. But this kind of information should be available on the National Statistical Office level. with the information on the amount of EPS and XPS installed in buildings, and also the amount and use of HBCD. Also for the building and construction sector, there are a range of other chemicals of concern which are relevant, including asbestos, again, the F gases, and lead. Here, lead in paint, quite relevant. A big part went into construction, and quite tricky and difficult to manage it when demolishing or repainting facilities. So this ends the 3 chapters on the different major uses of industrial POPs. Now only a few slides on the other chapters. One slide on national databases for the inventory of PCB containing transformer capacitors and related oils. It is recommended to generate one central database for all relevant transformers, capacitors, and circuit breakers, and update all information by marking all PCB containing equipment. Such a database is best hosted by the utility sectors and not by the National Statistical Office, like I said before. A database should contain all information needed for PCB management, including manufacturer, serial number, lightweight, PCB content, equipment condition, tested, and what kind of test. If there are different owners of equipment, then the database would have selected data access for the respective owners for an update. The Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Environment should have access to the database for national reporting, Article 15, and the NIP update, and for an overview of the management progress towards PCB phase out by 2025. That's in 2 months. Yeah, plus the 12 months of 2025, yeah, and then the elimination by 2028. But you see, yes, now it's high time to have a robust database and to promote the management. Summary information from the database can be included in the National Statistical Office for transparency for the public considering confidential business information. This means, of course, not in this public database that you can look for individual, but let's say kind of aggregated. There was a recent GGKP webinar for PCB management. Here is the link for it. It's on the website. Chapter 6 of the guidance was then on contaminated sites and the database. Article 6 of the Stockholm Convention notes that parties shall endeavor to identify POPs contaminated sites. The NIP guidance document suggests including a section on information on the state of knowledge on contaminated sites and waste, identification, likely numbers, remediation measures, and data on releases from the sites. A draft guidance on BAT-BEP for the management of POPs contaminated sites has recently been developed, providing information to define contaminated sites and a science-based stepwise approach to undertake identification and inventory and sustainable management of POPs contaminated sites. Yeah, so that's now just published. The purpose of a contaminated site inventory is to provide the base for risk-based prioritization and decision-making on further investigation, management, and implementation of containment and/or remedial action. A comprehensive inventory allows for an overview of the extent of contamination within regions, industrial sectors, and across a country. Summary information would be integrated into an updated NIP in the suggested sections of POP contaminated sites. POP contaminated sites are one relevant category of priority contaminants and may be integrated into a general database of contaminated sites, considering also other priority pollutants like metals, metalloids of concern, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, or oil. Many industrial countries have developed contaminated site databases. Here, for example, the Environmental Agency, the European Environmental Agency, or the US EPA's also developed site-specific national cleanup database here. It's open. Many countries have one national database where contaminated sites relevant information is compiled. For some countries, individual federal states might be responsible for managing soil pollution in their territory and hosting and updating contaminated site databases. This is, for example, the case here for Germany. So the National Statistical Office could host such a national database and also coordinate a national database in countries where provincial and federal state authorities normally host regional databases. Today, we have the Geographic Information System, GIS, which are increasingly used for the management of contaminated sites. These GIS are used in projects dealing with one individual sites and also projects on the regional and country levels dealing with multiple sites. So there is in the guidance a recommendation database for information for suspected and verified POP contaminated sites. So here it's recommended that site history, including past and current industries and operations and events that might have caused pollution would be included, site descriptions and site definitions, including GPS coordinates, site characteristics, including initial or developed conceptual site models, description of site surroundings with sensitive objects and receptors, status of the site assessment and site management, POPs and other contaminants, present or likely present, amount of different contaminated waste, soils, sediment and groundwaters, local and regional environmental monitoring data, contamination level of the soils, water biota, and affected population and other receptors. Then also, if available, enforcement activities and remediation actions. So in the guidance, we have also made a list of major contaminant site types for individual POPs and also the relevant information to be included in such a database. So the principal assessment of POP contaminated sites is described in the new draft guidance on BAD-BEP for the management of POP contaminated sites. And I think this can bring this issue a step forward because the last 20 years, not so much has been done on contaminated sites, but also here in Germany, we see, especially for free-range cattle, that this information is quite relevant. I give just one example, which we had in a GGKP webinar recently. This is PFAS contaminated sites in Europe. So here were not the authorities who did this compilation on PFAS contaminated sites, but it were journalists from 14 countries. And this database is actually available on the website in the internet, and you can screen these PFAS contaminated sites for the 27 European countries, and these are more than 20,000 PFAS contaminated sites. Last slide. Also, there are POP monitoring data. There are national and global monitoring data. Also here, generated POP monitoring data in countries like human milk, blood, air, soil, and sediment could also be compiled in a database at the National Statistical Office and could be linked, for example, to contaminated site data. As international support, the Stockholm Convention set up in 2005 a global monitoring plan to identify, generate, harmonize, collect, analyze, visualize, and interpret global data on environmental human exposure to POPs. This can track changes of POP levels in the environment and in humans. Meanwhile, there were 3 GMP phases which generated global data. The GMP data warehouse and the UNEP data dashboard is an online tool developed for handling all the POP monitoring data generated in the frame of the global monitoring plan under the Stockholm Convention, and country relevant data could be extracted then from these international database into a national database. And this national database, you could enrich them with all the data which are generated on the national level. The GMP and national data time series are supporting the implementation of the convention. especially the effectiveness evaluation for providing comparable, harmonized, and reliable information on POPs levels globally in core environmental matrices, air, human breast milk, blood, and water. Yeah, and also this should be available on the National Statistical Office level. Okay, so that was the presentation, and I think now we have time for questions. Anastasia?
Thank you very much, Roland. I think that was a very extensive presentation, and I believe there are a couple of slides more which will be left for the end of this webinar, including the recommendations. But we did have a couple of questions on the chat, so let's quickly look through. So there is a question from the countries working with RESET-Talks. I think it's Balkan countries. Is there any national statistical office in Europe, European Union as the whole, or maybe on the global level, developing POPs inventories? Maybe there are any positive examples of this kind of collective efforts, and how public this data can be, I mean, in terms of the sensitivity as well.
I mean, normally you have, I mean, I have given you the example of electronics and electronic waste, yeah, where now since more than 10 years, this is compiled on UN level. And you see now since recent years, it is also then calculated on the national level. And I think that this is quite useful, especially with this harmonized approach. And what I said, I would think that it would be also useful if this would be done, for example, for vehicles, for example, yeah. Or like I said, there is a international database also on construction and buildings, which is currently only considering this climate change related topic. Yeah, so there I think something is already available and something is not available. In respect to the European level, I mean, you have seen the PFAS inventory, which is available here on in the internet for all Europe. But also, I said the European Environmental Agency, they are working on compiling contaminated soils and doing inventory there on contaminated sites. So that's also on European level. But I think most then when it comes to nitty-gritty need to be done on the country level. When you look about inventory and compilation of inventory, there is every some years a compilation on inventories of unintentional POPs. So this is done by UNEP. Yeah, they are looking into, but they are using the country data. Yeah, so here, let's say the country data feed then finally in a summary of international inventories. I mean, what we have done for Africa, what you have seen, I mean, we have compiled for all 54 countries the plastic import in the last 30 years. And currently we are working on a publication on the import of all electronics in 54 African countries. Yeah, so the next presentation actually will be on the case study of Nigeria for this. But we also will develop these data also for other African countries. Yeah, and I think, yes, here you talk about RESET-Talks. I think it is good that, let's say, the science is thinking if they could help with some regional inventories. Yeah, so therefore also for the Balkan countries. Yeah, I think it's good that you work with RESET-Talks, and maybe by this that you harmonize inventories. But I think here maybe even more can be done. Yeah, I like, you know, this all African inventories we are developing with 2-3 researchers. Yeah, so I see when we bring more research capacity together, yeah, that we can work more on these inventory issues and help countries. You know, it is not actually the task of a officer in an environmental ministry, let's say, to do the nitty-gritties of inventories. It is rather, let's say, the environmental ministry should tell what they need, and then they should ask to their scientists, yeah, to support. And this is also one reason why I since 15 years I'm supporting this material and substance flow analysis and bring it from Vienna University to developing countries, because it is a very nice approach, and the outcome of this material and substance flow analysis are quite useful for policymakers then. Yeah, so maybe this to this question.
Thank you, Roland. And I fully understand there is no 100%, answer to the questions we have today. Unfortunately, that is the limitation of existing settings we have, and also the country-specific context as well. I think we have a very similar question, and you already addressed this, but maybe if you have anything to add. So the question is, we do have a National Office of Statistics. However, we think that presented aspect can be very alien to the statistical statistician general. So the question is, can they be trained, or can there be a training for the national statistical offices for the countries on these aspects? And for sure, as you mentioned, every country should develop their requirements, what they need, because statistical offices, they collect, they do surveys, but they do surveys based on their, old practices. And definitely POPs is not on this agenda. So it's more like demographic, economic, on specific, country level indicators. What could we do in this regard, to train the statistical offices to be more,
But I think maybe also to do a first, let's say, global conclusion on UN level. Yeah. And here, therefore, when I had to develop this guidance document, I thought, okay, no, I actually, if we only come with POPs to the National Statistical Office and you say you need to generate all these nitty-gritty things for the POPs, they will say, But if now you saw that it is not only for POPs, it's on the F gases, it's on asbestos, it's on plastics, it's on resources. Yeah. So I think if you come with the whole picture, yeah, and you say, I mean, actually, when we want to make a change in respect to circular economy, we need robust data for these major product and waste sectors. Yeah. And I think it makes sense that good statistics is available then for these bulk materials. And then under this, when you have this frame, you know how much electronic waste, how much plastics and so on. Yeah, then you can feed in the nitty-gritty. So that was, let's say, my idea when I developed this sectoral guidance. Yeah. And actually I contacted to this UN organization which is working on resources. And I asked them if they are already developing something to support countries to generate this data on country level. Yeah. But I think at that time it was not there yet. Yeah. So there were some, let's say, also scientific studies. Yeah. But I think this could be a very useful, and I said the link here with the resources could be a quite useful project. Yeah. And then when we have an idea what is useful on UN level, then we can develop a part of the curriculum for the National Statistical Office. Yeah. And I think for sure it's absolutely useful: electronics, end-of-life vehicles, building construction, the resources, and the pollutants. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's one way to go. And actually in the Sustainable Development Goals, one part is this kind of education also of statisticians. Yeah. And UN has also, I think, but afterwards I have one document right in the recommendations, which is about capacity building of national statistical offices. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Roland. We do have a couple of questions in the chat still, but I think we could address them simultaneously while Mr. Joshua Babayemi will be presenting, so we can save the time and make it on time within the next 30 minutes. So I guess it's time to present our next speaker, the Professor Joshua Babayemi, who conducted together with Roland the case study in Nigeria, and will share his experience. And Joshua, I hope you
can you share, Joshua?
Yeah, can I share now?
Yeah.
Yeah, please share your slides.
Okay.
So the last 15 years we worked together, yeah, starting with the PhD of Joshua. And in his PhD, he did an evaluation of material and substance flow analysis of PBDEs in electronics in Nigeria, and also material and substance flow of PBDEs in the transport sector in Nigeria. And now recently he compiled data from the HS codes, just what I said, from the UN Comtrade database, all the electronics which have been imported to Nigeria. And I think now over to you, Joshua.
Good afternoon,
We can
everyone.
see
Can
your
you see
slide.
my slide?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
you can
we
see
can
my
see it.
slide.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, yeah. I'll be making presentation on the case study, the inventory of POPs in electronic equipment in Nigeria. And then here are the outlines of my presentation. So it looks long, but I will try to be as brief as possible. As a way of introduction, the objective of the inventory was to analyze the total import of electronic equipment into Nigeria and to look at the amount of associated plastics and the persistent organic pollutants. For the electronic equipment considered, actually in the classification of United Nations University, you have 54, but we found 28 of them to be relevant for this inventory in terms of the volume imported into the country and the fraction of plastic associated, as well as the persistent organic pollutants. So the assessment covered a period of 1990 to 2022, which is 32 years back, using the harmonized system codes, usually referred to as HS code. For the classification of electronic equipment, we have the United Nations Universities classification, and we also have the EU classification. The United Nations classification, we have 54 distinct classes of electronic equipment, and the classification was based on the function of those equipment, the composition, the average weight, the end of life attribute of the equipment. For the EU6 classification, so the equipment were classified into 6 categories. We have category 1, category 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as displayed there. For category 1, we have the temperature exchange equipment. For category that's category 2. Then category 3, we have the lamps. The category 4A and 4B, we have the panels. Then the small equipment, category 5, and the small IT equipment in category 6. Now, in the study, we didn't look for the EU classification. We didn't consider category 3. So being mindful that it contained little or no amount of plastic. Example is the lamps. We know some of these lamps do not have appreciable amounts of plastics, and then or the associated persistent organic pollutants. So we consider the 28 categories based on the fact that they were the one imported in largest amounts, covered about 98% of total imports into the country, and also looking at they contained a reasonable amount of persistent organic pollutants. Now, one of the tools used in the data mining is the assessment of the United Nations Commodity Trade Statistics, usually referred to as UN Comtrade. As time goes on, I will display the page as it is. And one of the tools used to access that website is the HS codes. There are 2 different websites. We have UN Comtrade websites, and you have the HS website separately. So we get the HS codes from the HS website. That is the relevant HS code for the electronic equipment. and then we use that to access the relevant data from United Nations Comtrade database. So when you get to the UN Comtrade database, the first page you see will be something like this. And then you have a place where you can log in if you are already registered. If you are not registered, once you click on the login, it will direct you to where you can register. For the first page, when you get to the website, you have something like this, where you can have the period of data you want, whether you want it annual or you want it maybe on monthly basis. Then here you can select the flow, whether it's the export or the import you want to access. Then here you input the code where you have the total of all HS codes. You can input the HS codes. Once you input the HS codes here, it will automatically display the description of the HS code you have inputted. It will give the definitions or the categories of products that HS code covered. Then if you want to look at from which country is that a product exported into your country, you can select here. And if you want it from any available country or all countries of the world, you leave it as all here. It will populate all the countries exporting into your country. Here you input your own country, that is from all countries of the world into your own country. Then in the year, if you're interested in a particular year, you input the year here. And if you're interested in all the years, you can leave it as all. But recently, the website was developed in such a way that if you select all, it will only display for the past 12 years. Then beyond 12 years, to begin to select all other years to as far as you want. Then after logging in, you have another page here. So as immediately you log in, you see something on the right-hand side here, My Comtrade Free. So meaning that your registration or login is successful. Then you can go on to access data. If you do not register, you may have limited access. Sometimes it may not even display anything for you until you log in or you register. That is the importance of registering. And after inputting all the data, you can just download straight or you preview your data before you download them. So here you have the page where you can modify whatever data, information, whatever parameter you have inputted in that website. So you can change them here or redefine them or reselect any parameters you want. Now, after downloading your data or you preview, this is a preview page. You have something like this. This is a typical page. So you have the HS code inputted here as 3901. That's one of the HS code for plastics. And then you have all these parameters. The first column, they are giving you the period of the import. Then you have the flow here, meaning it is X, here means export. Then this is the list of all the countries exporting into your own country. And then here you have your own country, like for example, Nigeria was selected here. And then the partner are the countries of the world. Or if you have selected a particular country, exporting to your country, it will give you the display here. And you have all other parameters here. But the most important here is the period, and then you want to know the amount in monetary terms here, given in dollars, and then in terms of mass or the weight, you have it here. You could also have alternative quantity. Sometimes it may be also displayed for you in the number of those equipment. You can have the export to your country in terms of the amount, the mass, or in terms of the number. So basically, to do the steps we took in carrying out the inventory involve the following steps. The first step is to determine the EE categories that were relevant for plastics and pulp inventory. It's not all EE categories. As I've given you, some of the electronic equipment will not even contain plastics at all. Those may not be relevant for the inventory. So in the first steps, you determine the relevant categories of EE first. And then in the second steps, you now look after you have determined the categories of electronic equipment, you look for the relevant HS codes. And after you have got the relevant HS codes, then you go to the UN Comtrade website to input the codes to be able to get the relevant data. And after you have got the data, there'll be so many things displayed for you. You synthesize it, you extract only what you need from there, and then you can export it to Excel, or you download Excel, write Excel format right away, and then you analyze your data. after analyzing the data, meaning now you know the exact amount of electronic equipment in different categories exported into your country, then you want to determine the plastic fractions for each category. After determining the plastic fraction, which is usually available from the document that Roland has been describing, from the sectoral guidance documents, you will get the factors you can use to determine the amount of plastics in each category. So after determining the factors or the fraction, you can now estimate the total plastics for each of those categories. And then from there, you can determine, you also, in that sectoral guidance, you have the POPs factors for the different categories of electronic equipment. So from there, you determine the factors, and then you estimate the total amount of POPs that is exported into your country via all those electronic equipment categories. Then you can now estimate the total electronic equipment exported to your country over a particular period of time, the amount of plastic associated, and the total amount of POPs associated for each category for a particular period of time. So for Nigeria, I've just summarized. So the data collection involves using HS codes to access data from UN Comtrade database. And then basically this is this simplified approach. Here you have the total amount of plastics. So that is the estimation, just have this simple approach. Total amount of plastics is equal to the total amount of electronic equipment exported to your country multiplied by that factor, plastic fraction factor. So that will give you the total amount of plastics associated with a particular category of equipment. And this factor, the plastic fraction for each category, you can find them in literature, particularly from the sectoral guidance document that Roland has just described. The same thing to estimate the POPs now, specifically the polybrominated diphenyl ethers. So the basic approach is the amount of polybrominated diphenyl ethers associated with each category of electronic equipment to be equal to the total amount of electronic equipment exported to your country, multiplied by the plastic fraction, then multiplied by the concentration of the PBDE. Also, this concentration is a factor that you have some of them mentioned or listed in the sectoral guidance documents. Then for the plastics, in the sectoral sectoral guidance documents, you have the factors for the plastics, and then you have the factors for the POPs, the hexa and heptabromodiphenyl ethers, and the deca BDE. So these were the factors that were used in the calculation. Then for the estimation, there are other, apart from polybrominated diphenyl ethers, there are other POPs of concern, such as HBCD, and such as and some others. You have HBCD, SCCP, you have MCCP. So the basic approach also to estimate the amount, the POP C here, that is representing the POP of concern we are after, and the amount can be estimated as the total amount of electronic equipment exported into your country, multiplied by the plastic fraction, and then multiplied by the concentration of that POP of concern. Again, you have relevant literatures where you can get the appropriate concentrations, particularly some of them are already mentioned in the UNEP sectoral guidance document. So from Nigeria case studies, we have this result. Actually, when we look at the total, the amount, the levels of the amounts of the electronic equipment exported into the country, we were able to categorize them into two. Those one whose import into the country were less than 10,000 kilotons for each category. So we have them, and we have those whose imports were greater than 10,000 kilotons. So for those whose imports were less than 10,000 kilotons, you have them listed here. The one with the total import into the country is that of household heating and ventilation, and down to cameras here. So the import of this into the country were less than, for each category was less than 10,000 kilotons. For those greater than 10,000 kilotons, high here you have the CRT TVs having the highest importation into the country. And then here you have the list. That's the laptops, notebooks, and the tablets. The import of this one into the country for each category was greater than 10,000 kilotons for that period of time, 1990 to year 2022. To have just a broad overview, a general overview, in the column one, the first column here, you have all the 28 categories of electrical electronic equipment considered listed here, and then the total quantity imported into the country within that period of time. And then here you have the plastic fraction, that is the F factor that I mentioned about, which you can conveniently get from the sectoral guidance and from available literatures. Then from here, you can estimate the total amount of plastics associated with that category. Then you have the concentration of hexaheptal BDE in each category. When you use that to multiply the amount of plastics, then that will give you the amount of each POPs as you have it here. And then by the time you add the hexaheptal and the deca BDE, you have the total PBDE in the last column there. Now, the estimated total we imported in there are, apart from United Nations Comtrade database, that is official database, but there are some countries in Africa, especially those who have porous borders. Some equipment also entered into the country, which were not captured in the official database, the UN Comtrade database. There are other available sources of information in the country. There were even some practical assessments of some shipments at the ports to look at what were coming into the country for a particular period of time. So we are also able to estimate some amount of electrical electronic equipment that are not captured in official database. So adding all that together, in total, or Nigeria, within that period of time, we have a total, an estimate of 12,259 kilotons exported into the country. And then now looking at the official import, and then those ones that were not covered in the Comtrade database, just for comparison, we have this small table here. So for the deca BDE, based on the Comtrade database, you have this amount, and then based total now, including other sources, we have this amount, and the same thing for the other POPs that we have, other POPs of concern we have here, the relevant amount in the imported through the Comtrade database, and then through additional sources. We have it in the last column there. So in the summary or conclusion, the electrical electronic equipment import has been we have compiled for the past 30 years, that's 1990 to year 2022 in Nigeria. And then based on that, we are able to estimate the amount of plastics and the relevant POPs. And then overall, between that 1990 and year 2022, we have about 4,568 kilotons of electrical electronic equipment. And then considering other sources, as I've mentioned, apart from the UN Comtrade database, we have an estimate of about 12,000 kilotons. So this electrical electronic equipment and the associated waste plastic contain an estimate of 1,043 tons of hexa BDE and 8,511 tons of deca BDE as major POPs additives, and other POPs of concern. The relevant amount estimated are listed here. So it is worth mentioning that this study is the first estimate of major POPs in plastics in low-income country, and provides important information for their management as a future outlook. With data of once we are able to get the relevant an estimate for the amount of electronic equipment imported into the country consistently for some years, and we are able to determine the service life, then it is easier to conduct dynamic material and substance flow analysis, in which it will be possible to now make prediction for the future, how much of such equipment will enter into the country, and how much waste will be associated, and that will be relevant for planning for waste management. Currently, there is a pilot study conducted by us in Zambia to compile the data import for the past 20 years. And once we also determine the service life, then we should be able to conduct material and substance flow, dynamic material and substance flow analysis, whereby it will be possible to predict the amount for the future, both the equipment and the associated waste and the plastics and the waste. So after the methodology is established, then it can be applied in other countries. So this study, the current study that we carried out, has been published and is available online, as it can be displayed there, published in Emerging Contaminants. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Roland, I think we have one question in particular to this case study. Shall we
Yes,
take up this question to Joshua about the time frame?
Please.
Yeah. So can you please tell us why you choose the time frame from 1990s to 2022 for the imported EEE? So you proposed that in the old EEE, the PBDs were included into the EEE, but also in the new EEE, the PBDs have been added. What about the export of EE from Nigeria to other countries? So this question is in the chat.
Yeah,
there was also
there was also exports. So for the limit of time, we didn't prepare slides for that, but not as much as that imported into the country. And the reason for choosing that 1990 to 2022, actually not all the categories had import from 1990 to 2022. The import for some started maybe early 20. For example, there is no mobile phones in the year 1990, especially in our country, in Nigeria. It's just recently, about 22 decades ago, that we started having that. But as far back as it's possible to get data, so 1990, then all along, some new equipment were coming up, having their HS codes and being added. That's basically the reason, just to make sure as far back as we could get data. And up to the recent year, 2022 is actually, if you are looking for data for 2023, you may not get here because many countries are still uploading into UN Comtrade database. In fact, you may not get anything for 2024, except for few countries who are always who are efficient in uploading their data into the database. But as far back as 2022, you are sure to get for almost all the countries and almost on all the equipment or the commodities. So that's the simple response to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, before 1990s, there was not too much electronics. Yeah, let's say also the import of electronic waste to Nigeria rather started after China stopped the import, right? And the stop of import of electronic waste to China was around 2007. Yeah, this mean also the major imports to Nigeria of the e-waste was rather after 2005. Yeah, so therefore, let's say the time frame of 1990s to 2022 cover the most part of the electronics topic and the electronic import to Nigeria. There was another question on the UN Comtrade database and the quality of data. If there is a specific evaluation, so these are the data which countries report. Yeah, so this mean, and this we see also in our publication, that for Nigeria, yes, I mean they are registering the official import of new electronics, but much of the electronic waste and secondhand electronics, especially before 2017, was kind of not registered there. Yeah, this means especially for countries which have a big import of electronic waste, the official UN Comtrade database might have a underestimate. Yeah, while maybe for other countries which do not have a direct border to a big port, yeah, this e-waste import is lower. Yeah, but this is normally known for the countries or by the countries if they have a huge import of electronic waste or not. And also, of course, electronic waste can be officially imported, yeah, and then go to the Comtrade database. So, Joshua, maybe you stop your screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we do have last 5 minutes. I'm not sure how much we can cover within this time, but we will appreciate.
No, but we can. Yeah, but I will do these are only let's say 8 slides. Yeah. So.
And for the rest of the questions, I guess we will address them after the webinar in the follow-up, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
There was one question was about contaminated sites. Yeah, if these were actual data from soil, or rather estimated that it was contaminated. So for this European PFAS inventory, it was actually both. So they have compiled data on known PFAS contamination, and this was mainly in water, groundwater, and so on. And they have compiled presumptive contaminated sites. And Joshua, can you stop your slides? Contaminated sites, and these presumptive contaminated sites is where there are no data yet, but where you know that, for example, firefighting foam has been used, or that there are industry which have used PFAS, yeah, for example, plating industry. This mean, and this is, I think, a big chance for developing country, and the first step that you first make for PFAS, for example, a presumptive contaminated site map, yeah, where you just compile the areas where it could be contaminated, and then in the next step you do the measurements, yeah, and between you do a kind of prioritization. There was another question about firefighting foams and PFAS content in respect to import to Africa. So here, unfortunately, yes, also for our countries, often there is not information in the material safety data sheets. So therefore, to really know it, you need to measure it. Yeah, and I think it would be great if we could find a way for developing countries to also get, let's say, their major stockpiles measured. So this could be discussed. Yeah. So I also know some research groups which are interested in measurements. Yeah. But without measurements, you will not understand what kind of PFAS you have in your firefighting foams. Okay, a few slides, and this is the end for this guidance, because in the last chapter there were recommendations for improving the data framework for supporting POP inventories. So here it is recommended to strengthen the National Statistical Office and the National Statistical System with following elements. And for this, there is a UN National Quality Assurance Framework Manual for Official Statistics. Yeah, develop or improve the National Quality Assurance Framework, then to support a coherent and robust system for statistical quality management that assures trust in and the quality of official statistics for POP and other chemicals of concern, considering elements described in the guidance for quality assurance and quality control of POPs. And this will be our next webinar on Thursday. The major needs for data are compiled in the UNEP guidance, the National Statistical Office team to assess how much of these data are already available and what additional information need to be generated and filled into the National Statistical Office system or other institutional databases. clarify what further information is needed, and explore from which ministries and other stakeholders this information can be gathered. Then to decide which relevant data for POP inventories to be hosted by the National Statistical Office and which data to be hosted by other stakeholders. So I gave the example of the PCB inventory. Ensure a long-term vision for statistical capacity development for relevant data. Promote open access to data and improve accessibility of statistics to manage for results and enhance governmental effectiveness. But also here, of course, if there are data which have confidential business information, this should not have open access, but sometimes data can then be agglomerated and so on, and without names, that also, let's say, some information is publicly available. Develop programs to increase the knowledge and skills needed to develop and use of statistics. Consideration of an overall plastic and resource inventory of the three sectors, the database of the National Statistical Office or ministry responsible for e-waste should include information that provides e-waste data relevant for POP inventories and more general data needed for reporting to the framework for the development of environmental statistics. So this is the big data gathering by UNEP, by the UN. Yeah, and also, let's say here for the framework for the development of environmental statistics, at the moment, electronics and electronic waste is included, but many other waste is not included. So maybe also here on the UN level, it could be discussed if this framework for the development of environmental statistics might be shaped a bit. Development of robust statistics for the transport sector and the building construction sector. A more detailed inventory might be developed in the frame of POP inventories for the Stockholm Convention, but then also on F-gas inventory, which will need to be managed in future considering climate change, and also the ODS. Consideration of an overall plastic and resource inventory. The POP inventory sector, transport, building, construction, and electronics, contain large resources like metals due to the long service life. These three sectors might contain more than 50% of all current plastics stock in the countries. So these sectors also contain a large share of metal stocks, which are key stocks for a circular economy. So therefore, the recommendation is for promotion and resource recovery from waste. The national database on these sectors at the National Statistical Office should include information on pollutants and the resources. And we should strengthen the synergies to other chemicals of concern listed in multilateral environmental agreements where relevant inventory data are needed. For effective management of chemicals, synergies for POP inventories and chemicals in other MIAs on chemicals should be implemented as appropriate. And here in a survey of this UNEP report on experience of developing and implementing NIPS, 95% of the parties interviewed, all from developing countries, confirmed that work of the convention would be linked to work on other multilateral agreements. Yeah, so this is already happening, but I think this can be strengthened, especially if the data are improved and streamlined. This synergistic implementation was driven primarily by limitations in human and financial resources, which made it difficult to comply with individual multilateral environmental agreement. So the recommendation is here to consider all these synergies of data compilation and inventory of POPs together with ODS, greenhouse gases and mercury, at least in these major use sectors where these are cross-cutting issues. Last is the recommendation of waste catalog. Recommendation for the development of a national waste catalog, including codes for POPs wastes. The existing official waste statistic and the waste catalogs should be reviewed and where needed be updated or developed to ensure that they, for the management of waste and pollutants, such as POPs waste, a categorization of waste is necessary, including, for example, the definition of what is hazardous waste, at what POP limit, and under what POP limit it's not hazardous waste. Yeah. Also Germany, there was a discussion for some time, but now it's concluded, and the levels are considered also for the CLP, which defines at what concentration, what chemical make a waste or a POP hazardous or not hazardous. But it would be good to harmonize this and consider this in waste catalogs in countries. Given the increased importance of waste-related policies, the main recommendation to official national statistics providers is to have a national work plan on waste statistics. Yeah, this is not only my recommendation, this comes from the UN ECE from 2021. The inventories of POPs can be on one hand contributing to such waste statistics in different sectors which are often not available in emerging economies. On the other hand, the development of a national waste statistic can provide a database for the POP inventories part in end of life of POP waste. The development of a robust waste catalogue is also a basis for the generation of robust statistical data on waste categories. So also that they are consistent with the concepts and scope, definitions and classification used in international questionnaires of United Nations, the Basel Convention reporting format, and possibly also looking to the waste categories of OECD. Consider major waste fractions containing POPs above low POP limits, for example, waste containing PCBs, pesticides, PFAS, certain plastic fractions of e-waste, certain waste wood fractions, and that they are fit for purpose for the needs of national and international waste-related policies, and that they set national environmentally sound disposal standards for the respective waste categories. So I know that many countries do not have waste catalogs, but without a waste catalog, a robust waste catalog, waste management is very difficult or rather not possible. Then, yes, recommendation for the appropriate use of US HS codes and custom reporting. You have seen one example in the presentation of Joshua, but one recommendation here is to use the most recent HS code from 2022 edition. So countries have to switch and update to train custom authorities and other companies in use and reporting of HS codes. For export of POP and POP containing mixtures, it should be assured that the appropriate HS codes are consistently applied. And if chemicals are imported under HS code specific for POPs, there should be a mechanism in place for assessment of further use and checking if an exemption for use exists or if actually this kind of import need to be rejected. Last slide. It is a recommendation for the implementation of the global harmonized system, which is applied and implemented in many countries, but also in many developing countries, it's not yet implemented. So here the global harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, if you have that, then also the imports of chemicals are accompanied by safety data sheets and the CAS numbers. And the advantage is then if you have CAS numbers for specific chemicals, then this can be used also as identifier for POPs, because HS codes often cannot be used as identifier. So therefore, a mechanism for an assessment or spot check of chemicals or products imported under HS codes under which POPs can be imported is recommended. This means many HS codes are not specific. So if chemicals come under this HS codes, one option could be this kind of spot check. Yeah, and if you would have then your GHS system implemented, then you can check the CAS number and then you could conclude what kind of chemical it is. Okay, so that was the recommendation part of the guidance of today. Anastasia?
Yes, Roland, thank you very much. I think we tried to cover the most of the guidance, and also it was very great to have Joshua today, who shared, we've spoken about the UN Comtrade database before in the sectoral guidance webinar, and we didn't really go deep into, the particular case. It was really great to see how in Nigeria this data was, collected from the available data and how it was compiled. I think we are...
Anastasia, so I just, you have sent me the questions, yeah? So maybe just a last comment to a few questions. So one question was, is there any inventory data available for POP and other pollutants in different plastic waste generated in India? So in India, I think there was only, I only know one study from Toxic Links, which analyzed a few plastics, and also the regional center. I think they analyzed 6 plastic samples also for PVDEs. That was in cooperation with Recetox. This was rather for capacity building. So I think for India, it would be super that this kind of assessment, especially of recyclates, would be, let's say, increased, because yes, at the moment you have really only a few data, which is not sufficient, but you have an active regional center, which analytical capacity. So I think that this can be improved in future. Then yes, the question on the idea of chemical composition of firefighting foams, like I said, no, you really need a monitoring. And for countries importing electronic equipment, what should be taken into consideration for inventories, as some electronic equipment may reach the end of life elsewhere due to the mobility of people? Okay, but I think this is rather a small export, So I think I mean, for electronics, you have these guidances, you have this international electronic monitor, so you have good information on these issues, So my recommendation would be to look to the website I gave you, So they have much resources. And like I said, they also are doing now country electronic waste assessment and support. I just mentioned Lebanon, but they have more countries. So maybe countries can ask to UNITAR if they could apply for being considered that such an e-waste monitor is developed for the country. I don't know how this mechanism work for UNITAR, but you can go. The name is Mr. Balde and Professor Kür, and check with them if you as a country might be interested in such an e-waste monitor for your country, what will be possible from UNITAR side. I think that's all, Anastasia, from the questions.
We do still have a lot of questions on the chat, but we technically do not have the time to address all of them in this webinar today. We will do this in the follow-up messages that we'll be addressing to the countries after, together with the video recordings and the slides and all other information, including the links that you've been sharing, and Joshua also been sharing, I think, very valuable resources from the academia as well. So we'll be sharing the whole report on this webinar together with all the participants quite soon after. And I think it's time to wrap up this event. Very much thank you to everyone who joined. We didn't really expect that many people, but we had quite a lot of people who stayed with us till the very end. Thank you very much, and we really hope that it was helpful and we could address your questions and help you in developing your NIPS and POPs inventories as well. Thank you very much, and see you on Thursday on our another webinar on quality assurance and quality control of POPs inventories data. Thank you and see you. Bye.